Thank you very much for joining me tonight in the Access Pacific User Group meeting. We meet the first Thursday of every month at 6:30 p.m. Pacific time. Tonight, I'm going to talk about my recent experience over the past 4 or 5 weeks working with the Northwind Developers Edition template that Tom and his team created over a couple of 3 years ago now. An interest that I've always had in PowerApps and what I learned about the way to make it work, which involves largely moving a lot of the code or the heavy duty processing back into SQL Server using stored procedures. And I'll talk about that experience a little bit. Before we jump in, quick roundup on what's going on. We're heading into summer and several of the groups are sort of winding down through the summer months. Right now, it looks like Access Italia has a meeting scheduled for May. I translated it. It's graphic ideas for a friendly interface. If you know Alessandro's work, he has a very strong skill set for creating really interesting graphical interfaces. I'm thinking that'll be in that same vein. I forgot what Maria said 2 days ago. She said what her next meeting was going to be, and I've already forgotten. Crystal or Adrian, do you remember what she said? Well, that's Adrian.
Yes,
Is that right?
it is Adrian. So
It's
he should
Adrian.
tell you.
I looked at your face and yes, it's you. Okay, Adrian's going to be talking about a project he's working on in May. Whew. Now I feel a whole lot better. I remembered all on my own. Okay, I don't know what Kent's going to talk about. He never provides much advance notice, but I'm sure it'll be along the same vein as the previous meeting. That's the 20. That's not March the 21st. That should be May.
Actually, George, Kent's meetings are more like, hey, let's come, we'll show a few things, and then we're just going to open up the floor and go wild.
Yeah, that's why I think he doesn't ever talk about them ahead of time. But he's
Yeah,
been
he has
following.
no clue.
Yeah, he's been following a theme for recent months, and I think he's probably still interested in the same
Yeah, it's
GDI
along
stuff.
those veins, but there's also a lot of other topics, and I'm
Yeah,
actually surprised he isn't here tonight. Usually he comes to your meetings.
yeah, he may be boycotting because of the topic. I don't know. And for Access Europe, Carl is going to do a reprise of the recent update from the Access DevCon, updates from Microsoft, what their plans are for the future. There's some interesting things coming, large monitor support, improvements to Monaco. I heard a rumbling this morning that the faster load time for Monaco might be making it out into the current channel or into a beta channel. So you should be seeing that pretty soon. And of course, the improvements to modern charts and all the rest of the stuff that they're doing. Version control, which is on the table, and Jeff was talking about that earlier, and I'm kind of branching into that topic towards the end of what I'm going to talk about. So that's all very timely. Right now, Juan's groups, Access with SQL Server and Access Beginners, they have nothing on the calendar, but he generally does have a meeting, and I don't know what his plans are. I know he takes the summer off, but I'm not sure if that's going to start next month or what. And for June, John Colby approached me about a tool that he built several years ago to provide quick access to built-in database properties. And I thought that would be a really interesting lead-in discussion. It probably won't take an hour, but I thought it would be a really good lead-in topic for a general discussion of what tools you use. There are, Crystal has a lot of analysis tools and so on. What are the tools that you like to use that you've developed for your own use? Just quick and simple things that you like to use. This one that he showed me, I think is kind of interesting. It gives you a quick look at all the built-in database properties if you're trying to prepare your app for distribution. And it's kind of lightweight, but it might lead to something more. And so with that, I'll move on into my presentation. I would appreciate feedback, but I don't really know how the flow will go. So if you have a question, either drop it into the chat. Oh, and there's another presentation, Mr. Ruggiero, and I've forgotten your first name already. Would you unmute and just,
Yes, Domenico Ruggiero.
oh, Domenico, yes, I should, yeah, Domenico, yeah. So you'll be talking, you're moving to July and delivering.
Colin's going to do July. Yeah, Colin's going to do July because his presentation may just be more timely to do it then,
Okay,
based on the release of information from Microsoft. So I'm going to fill in for June.
okay, for June, perfect. Fantastic. Thank you for that update. Appreciate it. So good news. Back to what I'm talking about tonight. This came to me over the past several years. I've been thinking about a lot of these issues and related topics, and I finally decided to do something about it. Out of this discussion, I kind of move this slide to the front because I also want to set the stage for some of the things I'm going to be talking about. But the big questions that came out of this experience working with PowerApps and Northwind is, what is the proper way to handle code? Should it be primarily in the interface, or should it be primarily in the database? Should the logic be in the interface? Should the logic be in the database? And I'm sure there's a huge discussion that we could have around that. How different are the skill sets required to be a good interface designer, developer, or a good back-end database developer? Are they the same? Is there a huge overlap? I think for those of us who are in the Access world, we just take it for granted that we wear all of those hats. But I think in a lot of places that may not be the case. So following out of that question comes, can a solo developer like one of us achieve a great enough skill level in multiple environments to be successful? And I'm talking about not just Access, but .NET and all the other potential environments. What is a realistic expectation? Can we, and this leads to what Jeff was talking about earlier, is it realistic to expect a team of SQL Server developers, VBA developers, and Power App developers? And I found my first typo in my first slide here. Is it realistic to expect a team like that to collaborate on a project? And what development models can support that? And that's the feedback that I'm primarily looking for. Is this a case of encoding business logic in the database? Is that something that I should be concerned about doing? Doing what I'm doing, does that violate the concept that business logic should not know where the data came from? And you'll see why that's a concern when I get into the demo. So keep all those questions in mind, and we'll talk about those at the end of my formal presentation. Over the past several years, I've had an opportunity to do a lot of different things, being retired and not responsible for meeting deadlines for clients. And I can follow interests that I have. So I worked on the Northwind 2 development team with Tom and Don and Kim and George Young. It culminated in the release of the Northwind Starter and the Northwind Developer Editions. And at the time, I remember telling Tom, I would really like to see if I could make this work in PowerApps. I've attended a lot of chapter presentations and discussions of classes and subclassing over the last couple of years. And although I would not consider myself knowledgeable enough to really take a deep dive there, I think some of the things that I've learned appeal to me as a way to approach other projects. The modular approach to code writing. One of the weaknesses of PowerApps is that everything is copy paste. You write code in one control, or say a command button, and then you copy the command button or you copy the code. Now there's no reusability built in. The alternative, which I see here in the class world, is that code is reusable. You write it once and then you reuse it often. One of the things that drove me to think about this was, okay, finding where in this mess did I use this before? Can I go copy something that I wrote before and reuse it? If I copy it, will it be exactly the same? Do I have to modify it? There's a lot of drama around that kind of development. It appealed to me when I was young and full of ambition, but as I got old and slow, I no longer find that drama very appealing. There are other related concepts that appeal to me here. Encapsulation or isolation. You have one function that does one thing, and you don't have to worry about contaminating or polluting other procedures by making a modification. You have predefined properties and methods that you know if you put the same inputs in, you're going to get the same outputs in, regardless of where you call that from. It's consistency across the entire application. And of course, you have event listeners and handlers. Second thread that brought me here is I've had a long-standing personal interest in webby technology. I co-authored books on Access web databases and Access web apps. And somebody at Microsoft told Ben Clothier and I, that we had the distinct honor of being the first and only authors who ever wrote about Access web apps. Okay, and then the final thread that's kind of the background to all of this is the recurring rumors that Access is dying. And I kept thinking, what do we do if those rumors become true? What are the alternative tools for power users? I'm not talking about professional developers like you, the people here tonight, because you all have skill sets that transfer, but for the power users, the guys in the department level somewhere who are just creating little databases for their department, if Access ever dies, is PowerApps really going to be a viable alternative or not? Is it a competitor with us? Is it a friend? Is it have the power to really go beyond what's very, very basic, straightforward? So one of the unstated goals that we talked about on the Northwind team was that we hoped other developers would take up the challenge of doing things like expanding and enhancing the Northwind 2 templates, adding a stock take. We incorporated stock take, but there's not really a lot of meat there. Split orders, we did not provide a way to handle split orders. It's either all or none. We thought that would be an enhancement that might be worthwhile. Or returns, there's no way to return orders. Another thing that might make it more interesting or useful is a way to support multiple users with a split database design. What would you have to do to make that a viable option? How much work would it take to do that? And of course, migrating the data to a server-based database such as SQL Server. Maybe even create a browser-based version. So the sky's the limit, along with your imagination and enthusiasm. So those are the threads that brought me to my challenge. I decided to create a version of Northwind using PowerApps, using the core functions. And this is what I set out as my phase 1, first tier minimum goals that I could hopefully achieve. Create a PowerApps interface that performs all or most of the functions incorporated into Northwind Developer Edition, subject to a reality constraint. For example, printing reports. I don't know how. There are some very simple reporting facilities. And actually, I printed a report today. Printing reports is very limited. It can be done. I printed one today. It looks really icky, but it worked. And that came out of the browser control. So the core CRUD data operations in Northwind that I decided I wanted to set as my minimal standard of proof of concept be able to create new products, companies, employees, orders, and purchase orders. And under orders and purchase orders, we have order details and purchase order details. So there are 7 basic entities that we have to create. The second operation is to read or select, be able to retrieve those 7 entities back into an interface, update them, and delete obsolete products, companies, employees, and orders. I figure if I can do those things, then I've got a minimal viable level to work with. That omits a lot of the other kinds of things that the templates do. For example, we have the ability to go out and watch videos, help videos, or search for help topics on the internet. I think that might be phase 2 or even phase 3 of this project that I get beyond this core functionality. But I intend to do them at some point if I possibly can. There are also some core data validation operations. For example, we advance orders through 4 steps. The first step is once you've created an order, you invoice it. And there's data validation that goes on before you can create an invoice. For example, an order has to have at least 1 line item before you can invoice it. So that kind of data validation has to be possible. And the same is true for purchase orders. So if I can do those things, I will say that I've achieved minimum viable status. The other thing that I wanted to do is migrate the data to a server database, especially or specifically SQL Server. There are 2 reasons for that. One is PowerApps doesn't connect to Access ACCDBs, so that's off the table automatically. And I'm more comfortable with SQL Server than with the other candidates like Dataverse and SharePoint. I'm not even sure SharePoint would work at all. And Dataverse doesn't seem to have what I would like to have available to work to use it, although it's certainly something to explore. So, and the final thing, of course, is ultimately we create a browser or tablet version of the Northwind application. So that's where I started from. Let me show you what I've got so far. Okay, so this is not the opening screen, but it's the comparable opening screen. Once you've logged into Northwind, set yourself up as a user, past the introductory welcome screen, this is the first working screen you see. And so I tried to design the screen to have the same overall appearance as the order form in Northwind, but obviously there are many differences about the environment that make it difficult. For example, we don't have a ribbon. So in place of a ribbon, I created a little menu. And right now it's only populated with a subset of the ribbon options: orders, purchase orders, products, companies, employees. Stock take has nothing behind it. System admin as yet has nothing behind it. But other than that, I tried to put the same kinds of features on the form that are in Northwind. So it starts with a filter with radio buttons to open orders. There are 60 open orders. And I've been pounding orders in here. There are many more than in the template itself. Recent orders. It refilters. And as you can see, the little buttons or the dots flashing across the screen, that means it's fetching data. Right away, you can probably tell that performance is going to be an interesting phenomenon. Again, that's partly due to the fact that we've got Zoom going and 3 other applications going. But performance in the browser can be variable. So those are the recent orders. In Northwind, we have My Orders. And that is because you can log in and identify yourself as a user. And from then on, the system knows who you are. I haven't yet implemented that. That's probably stage 2, maybe stage 3. for me to create the logins. So right now I'm just showing internet orders. And I thought, okay, we're on the internet. Might as well use the internet orders as that in that position. And of course, all orders, showing all orders ever entered into this system. And that was probably a mistake because it's never going to, oh, okay, it returned 84 orders altogether. One of the extras that we put in was a button that shows you the filter that's currently applied. So in this case, it's employee ID equals 10, which is show internet orders pending implementation of multiple users. This is something you'll see in place of message boxes in this environment. It's called a notification, and they appear here at the top of the screen. You have 3 or 4 options. This one is straight notification. You also get warnings and errors, and they're different colors depending on what level you're at. That's just a notification. Okay. Next step. Oh, while I'm here, and before I forget, I was going to show you this at some point. While that occurs to me, I'll show it to you really quickly. I have the ability to see how this will appear on a tablet. So you can see that it's responsive. It shrinks down to fit the tablet size. Font sizes. As you can see, when it shrinks down, the font sizes shrink down. Is that viewable for you? How is the visibility for you? I know that's sometimes an issue. Anybody have a problem? Raise your hand if you've got a problem with reading my screen. No problems. Okay. So let's go back to the browser version, which is, okay. Yeah, good. Yeah, I boosted my screen up. Hopefully it's readable. So there are 2 ways to get to the next screen. You can either select the order ID here or click the plus button to add a new order. And you can see the lag in my cursor as this performance. So I click this one. It's going to take me to the order details screen. Think of screens in the same way you would think of a form in Access, with one huge difference. In Access, you have the choice between bound and unbound forms. In PowerApps, you have the choice of unbound screens. And that has implications that we'll come back to later. So Crystal is having trouble reading the screen.
Crystal was just
Oh,
to your earlier.
back
sorry.
then, when you asked, I can see it now.
Oh, you can
fine.
see it. Okay, so in this view, it's viewable. Yeah. Now the tablet was just mostly to show you that it is responsive. Okay, so this is a partially completed order, and I'll talk you through some of the things. Again, we have the 4 steps: create an invoice, ship the order, receive payment, close the order. Notice that the products in the detail line are disabled. Once you create an invoice, data validation says we can no longer add or change products. So we use that data validation to control whether these are enabled or disabled. I've already added a shipping company. I'm not sure what's going to happen here. I practiced so many times that I've forgotten. Okay. An order cannot be shipped until all shipping related fields are filled. That was an example of an error type message. So I have to actually give it a ship date before I can invoice it. And I put this little button to just save myself typing. And now I have a bug. This has already been invoiced without a ship date. So my data validation is off. Oh, well, a bug to fix. The ship order button. And again, and now this time I get a success message telling me I've successfully sent a request through a stored procedure back to SQL Server to update this status and received a message back from SQL Server through that stored procedure that says, yep, got it, did it. And now the order is shipped. We can do the same thing with payment. Same thing happens. That invokes a stored procedure, sends a message off, update the status, we get back the notification succeeded. And finally, we'll close the order, and I'll make one more comment and then I'll move on. Right now, because I'm still in development, I'm recording all of the responses, whether they're successes or errors. I probably would not necessarily, well, that's a feedback question for you, actually. Should I or should I not show the success message at the end of the step? I've got it on now so that I know that positively SQL Server is responding, but I'm not sure that that's necessarily an enhancement that everybody's going to want. So that's one order. Let's look at a purchase order. And this time, I will create a new one because all the ones that I have practiced on are closed. So these buttons work exactly the same way. Clicking here edits, clicking here creates a new one. And this I worked on less, so the chance of a bug is a great deal higher in this environment. And of course, an error occurred. Well, we're still getting here though. So the first thing I have to do is select a vendor. And the list is filtered to the two vendors. Notice that the purchase order ID is identified as a 0. That's a slight difference from the Access world. I have to have a positive way to tell SQL Server this is a new order because I'm sending a message through a stored procedure. Create this new order, and I use the same stored procedure. I'll repeat that. I use the same stored procedure to also update existing records. So I have to have a way to tell it this purchase order number is 0. Treat it as a new purchase order and create one. I can select a submitter, and I will use internet sales. And I think that's all I really have to create a new purchase order. When I get a message back, a success, now I have a purchase order ID of 51 for this new purchase order. And I'll go ahead and submit it so I get the error message back. I think I know what's wrong, but I won't troubleshoot it. I'm going to go ahead and put a product on here. So what it does when I select a product, it goes to the product table and brings back the minimum reorder quantity that we have established. I can accept that minimum or add a larger number. Save it. And with any luck at all, once I get my success message back, as I said, this one I haven't worked on as much, and it's still not doing what I want it to do. It should show that order right, that order detail line here, purchase order detail line right here, and it's not. So I'm going to cheat. And that really blew it up. So there's a typical error message. So Tom has some points, and I'm going to stop the demo now. I'm going to address a couple of points. Tom raised the question of whether I should have used 2 stored procs. As a matter of fact, I do have 4 stored procs. One for create, one for read, one for update, and one for delete. However, I packaged them all up and send them back to SQL Server through one master stored procedure. That way I minimize the number of stored procs that I have to manage in this interface. Yeah, and I'm not going to spend any more time debugging because that is obviously not productive. Any other questions or comments? Okay, so that's a demo of the work in progress. And I mentioned bound forms versus unbound screens.
Yes, George, could you expand on what bound and unbound means?
Okay. For those of you who are not professional developers, bound forms means that Access has a tight linkage to either a table or a view or a query, which allows that form to manage a lot of the data update and data CRUD operations automatically in the bound form. And that takes a lot of the burden off of the user. Unbound forms don't have that connection, so you have to write everything into the form. You have to, you retrieve everything from the database into the interface and then write those values into the appropriate controls on the screen or the form. And then when you're done with it, you write them all back to the database. And that's entirely under your control, entirely under, well, as well or as poorly as you manage to write the code to do it.
And George, my question in the chat was, does PowerApps not even support bound forms, or are you just choosing unbound because you have your CRUD stored procedures that you want to?
That's the slide. That's the point that just popped up on my screen here. PowerApps has virtually no concept of binding updatable data to objects, with one exception, which are called, ironically, forms. They have a form which is data bound. I find them extremely frustrating to work with. If you remember back to the days of Access web apps, those of you who ever dabbled in them, we had the little forms and you could shuffle the controls around and back and forth and up and down on those forms, but that's about the extent of the customization. It's kind of how PowerApps forms are.
Do they call that canvas?
No, what I'm working with is a canvas. You can put a form in a screen as part of a screen. But to be honest with you, I'd rather not talk about PowerApps forms at all because I find them difficult to use, and I would not encourage anyone to use them except for a very, very simple application.
Hey, George.
Yes.
First of all, I love your way of describing things. You're so colorful and diplomatic, and it's interesting, very interesting. I have a question though.
Yes.
Since apparently there's no way to copy the logic from one application to another one, how can you document it?
Here we go, Crystal. Thank you. That's exactly what I want to talk about next. Code design patterns. How do you write code in this environment? How do you design code patterns in this environment to get as close as possible? It isn't exactly reusability, but to try to get closer on that spectrum to that. And that's what I want to talk about next, the code design patterns. And Tom already brought up the first of those as well. You document the logic inside the stored procedure in the SQL Server database. That's how I do it. And again, I told you, I'm looking for a lot of feedback towards the end of this because I'm just sort of muddling my way through here and thinking, this is an interesting idea. This is an interesting concept. Am I using something in a way that it shouldn't be done? Is it a useful way to look at it? Is it something that other people have done for a long time? I really don't know. And I'm looking for more feedback on that part too. So,
George, if you put your business logic in a stored procedure, what's a good way to send messages back?
I'll show you that in a minute.
All right.
Yeah. And remind me that if I don't do that adequately, I owe you that. Okay, so we know a lot about classes, as I mentioned, and I'll just reiterate 4 modules our classes, so we work with them in Access all the time. This whole idea of copy paste and then find it later, that drama annoys me. We have a single place to go to maintain our code. It's reusable. Parameters go in. I'm repeating my original slide as a refresher. PowerApps has, I mean, they're kind of quasi might look like that, but not really out of the box. And what I figured out with help from AI, frankly, I used Claude AI mostly. ChatGPT kept leading me down the primrose path in a way that I found unpleasant. So I switched to Claude, and it's been much more developer oriented. And I got a lot of the original concepts from other PowerApps developers. So I'll show you how I'm working at this and what I'm doing. So I return to my slide here. You can see that in SQL Server, I have a number of stored procedures. And I'll detail those more closely later. They're nested. And this addresses Tom's question about why one when you could have two. And actually, I have 4 of each. I have a create, a read, an update, and a delete version of each of those stored procedures. There are 7. Oh, my mouse. What happened? My mouse stopped lagging and immediately scrolled 3 screens at once. I have to keep my hand off the mouse, except when I'm actually trying to get it to work because it does lag so much. So I'm working with 7 entities to start with, and with 4 CRUD operations for each. That's a total of 28 nested stored procedures. I chose this approach, the entity-based versus operation, because to me that seemed more manageable. The alternative would be an operation-based hierarchy where you have a CRUD, a create, a read, an update, and a delete master, and within that master, 7 sub stored procedures for each of the entities. That seemed more difficult to manage to me for several reasons. I can talk about that, but I don't think that's the main focus. Okay, so each table has a different number of fields, making it tricky to organize by operation. Not only is it more difficult to keep track of 7, but each table has a different number of fields. So by the time you're passing in parameters and getting them back, that struck me as being, again, difficult to monitor. So I went this way. Now, later, as I get through this part where I get the data operations and the data validation solid and beta tested and everything, then I'll go back and add others for some of the other things that are available through Northwind. But for now, that was enough to chew off. Behind the scenes, we have child nested stored procedures. There's 1 for each CRUD operation. Operations on a single table account for the same fields, except for deletes. When you delete, you only need to pass it the primary key to delete. But the others, basically, you need the same set of fields. So the initial set of stored procedures, I adopted the naming convention that Z means these are stored procs that are used inside the masters and not to be called outside. I may relax that later, but for now I want to pass everything through one single point. Does that make sense? Go ahead.
I'm trying to understand how you put a stored procedure inside a stored procedure, George.
I'll get there real quick, Ben.
Okay.
Yeah. Frankly, Claude knew. Ask Claude to do it. It'll tell you how to do it. So this is just one set for the company and so on. There's a simpler set. Okay, so that's enough of that. Let's go look at. Okay, I had planned to show you the app code screen in PowerApps first. Would you rather see that, or would you rather dive straight into SQL Server? Let's take a vote and decide which way you want to go, because I can, abandon the plan and go look at that if you'd rather. Ben has expressed an interest. I'm willing to. Okay. All right. There's another vote for SQL Server. Okay.
Sorry,
So it's-
George, what exactly are we voting on here for the where you put your logic?
The logic is all inside these stored procedures. Or
Right.
not all of it, but the majority of it, the great majority of it is here.
Uh-huh.
That means if I need to alter the way add companies works, I go straight to the stored procedure and add it there. And I don't touch the CRUD that calls that stored procedure, because PowerApps knows about that master and it knows how to work with that master. So as long as I pass the right information through this master stored procedure, the stored procedure in SQL Server knows how to handle its children. I'm isolating.
So
Yeah.
what are you asking as you've expressed something there, but I'm not sure where the
I
question.
was saying, do you
You
want to
saying
look?
should we keep it there or should we move it?
Well, that's kind of the big question at the end.
Right. Oh well, in that case, if it's
So
If
do you
it-
want? So do you want to look at the SQL Server Stored Procs now, or do you want to go look at the PowerApps interface now?
Oh.
Because I plan to show the PowerApps interface, but if you'd rather, I can go straight to SQL Server. And we're already 45 minutes into it. Let's go look at SQL Server. I'm going to make a decision based on feedback. To me, that's the most interesting part as well.
George is unplugging one monitor to plug it back into the other port.
Yeah,
I was going to
exactly.
say, it's damn handy having Crystal here, though.
Yeah,
Thanks,
I don't
Business
handle
case.
change very well either. That's the other part of the problem. Can you see the
I'll let you know when it comes up, George. Not
Yeah.
there, not yet. At least for me, when it appears, I'll let you know. And I'm waffling because it hasn't yet.
Okay.
Yep.
you seeing it?
Yep.
Okay, so let's start with this one. Okay, so here's the logic, how it works. I'll go through this reasonably slowly. We have a stored procedure, which is called CRUD company. The CRUD types are 1 for create, 2 for read, 3 for update, 4 for delete. And today, when I was preparing this presentation, I thought to myself, George, you're kind of dumb. You could have used C, R, U, and D and saved yourself all the bother of translating back and forth between digits and letters. But hey, there's always phase 2. So when we call the procedure, and this is the master, so we tell it what kind of procedure we're going to run. We pass it in as an integer, and we default to 2, which is read, on the theory that we want to do no harm. If something goes wrong and my CRUD type is not what I thought it was, I'm only going to read records. I'm not going to accidentally delete or update records by using the default of 2. Because we're working with companies, I pass the company ID as an integer. That comes in with a default of 0. And when I was talking earlier about the option to create or update, if I pass the primary key as a 0, which is the default, then it knows that I'm going to create a new record. I mean, that's part of knowing. It knows because I'm passing in the create keyword, but it also knows that I'm not passing the value of an existing primary key. And it's going to handle that as a new record. Company name. I noticed this today when I was working on it, and I think this is wrong because company name is a required field. And I have to re-examine in my downstream logic to see if that is valid. I think I know why I did that. But that theoretically is a required field, and so it shouldn't be null. But I think there's a reason why I did that later. We pass in the other parameters to tell us how to set up this table. Ben, here's your answer. This is how I pass messages back. I pass them back as output parameters. I send 3 standard output parameters, what I'm calling the unified ID, and that will either be the primary key generated by a new record or the primary key of the record I passed in to process. SQL Server will generate an error code if I blew it somehow, and that will be a non-zero error code. So the default that I'm going to pass back out is 0. It will also give me an error message if an error occurs, and I'm going to pass that back out. I set it to the length of 400. That should be enough to handle most error messages, and the default is going to be success. Then we run a try block. Here's how we pass these variables or these parameters into our child stored procedures. We pass in the 3 basic required parameters, local ID. We declare it as local error message, and local message. I'm gonna go through and explain this because without bothering to try to get into the detail, because we don't have a lot of time. And if you're really interested, we can talk about it in a different session. But rather than get bogged down in the code, I'm just going to go through it. If we tell it we want to create a new company, then we execute the add company stored proc, and it tells me the parameters I need to give it to make it work. You can see them there. These are all the parameters that stored procedure expects. So what I do is I pass to this expected parameter the company name, if I got one, from the master. Company ID is the company ID I just retrieved from the master. Business phone, and so on. Those are the values that were passed in up here. They're aliased so that we can keep straight which ones are which. When that stored procedure runs, it passes back the 3 standard values as output parameters. And again, Ben, they come out as output. On success, a new primary key is passed back out, and I'll show you that next. Type 2, which is read, all I need is the company ID to read the records from that table. This is a bulk star select all query. I'm working on a refinement to this that would allow me to select fields, but I'm not ready to implement that yet. So I've got a beta version and an alpha version, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to make this work version. Same thing, we get back the result. Update, we send in the values to update, get back the result. And with type 4, which is the delete, sometimes I get an error because referential integrity will not allow me to delete a record if it has related records. So this one is the most likely to pass back an error message, especially if I'm not careful about what I'm deleting. At the end of those 4 steps, I take whatever local ID was generated by whichever child stored procedure ran. Now, only one of those 4 stored procedures will actually run because we're switching depending on what type it was. So we'll get back one local ID, which I give back to the master as unified ID. So when it reports back, it will report back that, well, it's a primary key field. It will report back whatever error message was raised and whatever local message was raised. Then we begin the catch block. This one is really simple. If it errors in any way, I just send back 0, the error code, and the error message. And I parse this error message in PowerApps because it's SQL Server language. So I catch the error number and parse it in PowerApps. So I give a more user-friendly. Yeah. There's a question about cascading delete, which I'll catch. Yeah, I've debated back and forth about whether to do that. I I'm in favor of not letting cascade delete run because of some of the damage you can do, especially where we can potentially create orphaned orders in a transactional database. Okay, so now are there any questions about this overall design? I'm going to hop
Yes.
over.
I have a question.
Yes.
Go ahead, Mr. Rogerio.
Go ahead.
No, I didn't necessarily have a question. I was just sharing with you all there in the chat the notion of having an archive table that stores something that's deleted. Yeah, it may not be needed, but just in the event that a user does
Yes.
delete a record, me and my clients often like to say, have the phrase that we need to save the user from themselves.
Exactly.
So we don't want
and
the
actually,
data to absolutely disappear into the nothingness.
yeah.
But we do have an activity trigger that puts it into an archive table.
Right. Yeah. And if you remember, my initial statement was I'm going to do this very basic phase 1 stuff and make sure that it's all solid before I tackle the more advanced. Tom, we do that in Northwind, don't we, in Access? Doesn't it allow for logging?
It's a good question. Do we have a logging table?
It seems I can't remember if we do or not. I know we log errors.
Yeah, I think we definitely log errors. So, but do we log them to a text file? I don't remember.
Yeah. It occurred to me, and I said, I pushed a lot of stuff off because I've had enough challenges learning how to do this and making all the mind shifts to get it to work that I don't want to tackle those next level things until I'm sure this is all good. So in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and show you how the add company stored procedure works. And remember, this is called by the master CRUD stored procedure. The master stored procedure passes in the company name that it got. And notice that it absolutely expects a company name because that's a required field. And I think the reason I decided not to make it required at the parent level was that there may be update operations that update other fields, and I don't want to force the user to provide a company name every time. That may be the reason. But I'm not sure. I can't remember. And again, we're going to use the default value for the company type, business phone, address. Now I'm using nulls here, even though these are required fields. And there was, I'm probably going to come back and revise this too. And I won't get into the nitty gritty, the weeds on why I did this, but that was a deliberate choice, even though those are required fields. I default tax status and my 3 standard feedback parameters, the local ID, and that's the ID of whatever company we're going to create, the error if there was one, and the error message if there was one. Then we do a try, insert. Oh, yeah. I'm still playing with this. I think the reason I'm allowing nulls is that if it doesn't make sense. Never mind. I'm gonna confuse myself and get down the weeds. This probably all is wrong now that I look at it. If we succeed in creating a new record, we get the newly created primary key from scope identity. The error code is 0 because it worked successfully, and we pass back added and the company name. In the catch block, we simply say, if we failed, we send back a 0 for the primary key, the number of the error that was raised, and SQL Server's default syntax. Those bubble back up into the master stored procedure, and from the master stored procedure, they're passed back into the PowerApps world. That encapsulates all of that logic in one of 4 child stored procedures in one of 7 master stored procedures. That's kind of like all the overview of this procedure. Do you have any specific questions about this before I go back out?
Yeah, George, I have a question about
Yes.
the parameters, because there's no optional parameters in stored procedures. So if you're doing a delete and all you need to do is send the primary key, you still got to send all the other columns, right?
Nope.
Why not?
This-
Is there a version of SQL that allows optional parameters?
Well, I'm using 2022, and I don't know what version you're on, but that syntax, which I just highlighted, makes that an optional parameter.
Okay. And like 2016 or something like that, I know it doesn't work.
Okay. So that's a good point. That's a good point to document as well. And John has already called out documentation, and I agree. I'm at a point where I need to start documenting what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, because as you say, I think I've confused myself here already tonight with this. This doesn't look right to me anymore, but it looked right when I wrote it. So I'm going to have to document the heck out of everything. And that'll be part of what because eventually I intend to make this available as I don't know whether as a what's a good way? I'll ask the question now. What's a good way to distribute this kind of code?
Well,
Any
if
thoughts?
you are getting to the point where you have a Northwind 3.0, then I would talk to Microsoft about it.
That's an interesting thought. It would not be anything to do with the Access team, I'm pretty sure. And my contacts outside of that are limited, but
That's where I would start. I would start with the Access team because that's the people you know,
yeah,
and then go from there.
yeah. That's a good. I really hadn't been that bold, but you're right. Now, I think what I'm thinking I can do is just create a script to generate the database and all the tables and all the data and all the stored procs and distribute that script. But you know,
Visual Studio can do that for you.
yeah. So that would be the other option. So Domenico asked about this null if. This syntax, what this does, if I can explain it. I'm saying I'm not sure it's right. What it does is if there's already a null in that field, it doesn't try to update it with a 0 length string, which is not allowed by the data validation. It makes sure that it comes back in as a null.
If the first parameter equals the second parameter, it returns null.
Yeah. So that's why I say I'm not sure that that's even valid, because that's a required field in the table. So I probably did this when I was testing and getting all kinds of errors, and just as a shortcut to avoid the errors. It might go on GitHub. That's another possibility. It could go on GitHub, but I have to learn how to use GitHub much more effectively first. Okay, so are there any other questions about this strategy?
So my understanding is that you feel like having, what was it, 7 times 4 stored procedures would get a bit unwieldy. So I'm going to create 7 more to be their parents,
Yes.
the entity stored procedures. And that is, I'm still not quite seeing the benefit, because all of the real work happens in the child procedures. The entity stored procedure is just a pass-through.
It's just a pass. It's a pass-through to isolate it from PowerApps. The whole value to me is that it isolates the work from the consumer. I know that if I pass it through one of these, I'm going to get whatever the current version of that stored procedure is. And I don't have to update the PowerApps application to recognize a new stored procedure.
because you're thinking that the child stored procedure names will change or the interface will change?
I'm hedging my bets at this point primarily. I think it's more of a bet hedging strategy.
An
I
extra level of indirection
yeah.
gives you freedom.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Now there is an opportunity, there is a possibility, Tom, and I experimented with that yesterday and I decided not to even, I wasn't going to bring it up, but you've already brought up the concept. But I think there's a way to create, well, at least for the read, the select version, I can create a generic version of the select stored procedure, pass it the table name, the where clause, and the order by clause. And with dynamic SQL, send it back out.
Mhm.
And that would then eliminate 7 stored procedures, 7 child, if I can make that work consistently with all of them.
Mhm. At the expense of no pre-compilation and no optimization.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's exactly the conversation that I wanted to have tonight is, is this really a solution looking for a problem? Or is it a viable solution? Am I putting too much stock in isolating the data from the consumer?
Mhm.
Because frankly, I don't think I could do a PowerApps app that does justice to Northwind without something like this to support it.
Mhm.
This all evolved over the last 3 weeks, and I'm still puzzled by a lot of these things. Whether or not it's a reasonable thing to do. Okay, but I'm going to wrap up real quickly then. So I was going to show you how the app code screen works in PowerApps, but I think I'll just breeze over that real quickly. Okay.
Right.
Now,
It doesn't look like you've shared the whole screen, but you might have done.
what can you see? So you
I don't see your start your taskbar or anything like that.
Oh, perfect. You're looking at a PowerPoint slide with 2 black squares on it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, this is a mock-up of what the PowerApps does to invoke that stored procedure. It requires 2 screens. Now, there's a hidden screen. Now, think about in Access, you can open a form hidden with controls on it and reference the controls to get the values from those controls. That's a similar concept to what this is. This screen resides in memory. It's never visible to the user. And the way I make it stay in memory is it has a control, and I put another control, a text box, on an active screen, and all it does is report the value of this control. And it's just sitting there saying true, 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 or false, 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 false. But every time it checks to see if that value is the same, it forces this screen to remain active in memory. And what that allows me to do is when I change the value of a variable, and I call that variable GV for global variable, toggle the CRUD order button. When that value changes from true to false, this toggle button changes from true to false. And because it's looking at that value, it has to stay in memory to do that. When that happens, when this value changes, then there's an on-change action behind this toggle button that fires, and that invokes the stored procedure. It passes the proper parameters, the proper CRUD type, and so on, and fires it. And that's the mechanism that allows me to consolidate all of the code in one screen, call it through the same kind of mechanism. And all this screen has to know about is that there is a control somewhere that's either true or false. It doesn't know anything about the code that runs. All it knows is that that value changed from true to false or false to true. It has no impact on anything here by itself. It's just watching that control and telling me, yes, true, 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 or false, 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 false. And that's the mechanism by which it works.
How do you get it to call the stored procedure, George? Can you show us that?
You, one more try. Let's see if I did it right this time. I really don't want to take a lot of time doing this. Can you see it? Can you see the PowerApp screen now?
Yep.
Oh, I finally did it right. I think this calls for a round of applause.
Okay, George, you can applaud us.
Yay!
Yay.
Okay, so here's no, I don't want to publish it. See, I really don't want to call too much attention to this interface because my main concern is how I'm handling the data. Adrian asked, you call it a variable when it's a control. The name of, okay, the toggle button itself is a control. There is also a separate variable. So let's see, I'm on purchase orders. The one that I want to work with for this demo, this part of the demo, is company list. I think. Nope, not company.
I expected the code to be behind the save button click.
There is code there, but I picked the wrong one. Where was I looking? Oh, shoot. Oh, that's okay. Here's this one. This is the one that has it on. Okay. There's code in two places, but the code that really matters is in. Oh, please tell me you didn't. I'm going to have a heart attack. Is it there? Please tell me. Oh, no, that's company. Did I set it up for orders? I think maybe I set it up for orders. Well, company was the last one I worked on, and that's not complete. So let's go back to orders. Let's go back to orders. Order list.
Is this blistering pace something we can expect if we get into this, George?
It's slower than normal because we are, like I say, I'm running an internet connection, Zoom, as well as SSMS. So it's slower than normal, but it is never, well, it's much faster in the runtime environment. I'm in the design environment, but yes, that is a potential issue. Okay. But you also have to keep in mind, I'll take a quick aside and address that in a separate fashion. I have at this point 18 screens, I think 17, 18. A typical, air quotes, typical PowerApps app has 1 to 10. So it's already twice as large, nearly as what is typically done. And I'm probably well less than half done with it. So I think that also plays into the situation. Okay, so there is my hidden control. Normally it's hidden. Right now it's visible and it has the value of false because it's looking at that control. And all it's doing is reporting the current value of that control. Normally it's not visible. I turn it. And so the user never sees it. So how it triggers is right here. No, let's see, this one triggers it. And you can see the cursor lag there. When I run this code, come on. On select is roughly the equivalent to on click. And I hit live rather than on click, on select. My cursor is betraying me. I'm so sorry. the relevant part of this. Oh, this is painful, isn't it? Okay, let's ignore that. The first thing we do is we set a variable to the CRUD order type. Now, the value of the magic number, which is an enum, it's actually not an enum in this environment, but the value of that is 2, which is R for read, which is the second position in CRUD. And as I said earlier, that was kind of dumb. I could have just called it R and saved myself the translation back and forth too. But at the time, I was still young and immature. The next thing it does, it creates a variable or sets a variable for variable, which is a record. PowerApps variables can contain anything from a single number or text string to a date to a record to an entire table. This one happens to be a record, and it has nothing set because I haven't clicked it yet. Then the third step is to toggle that toggle button on the other screen. It changes it from false to true or true to false simply by changing to the not value of what it is. That's the code that's required on any screen to run any stored procedure anywhere in this application. Well, that's not 100% true. I haven't moved them all to that environment. I still have a few running differently. But when I'm done, all I need to do is pass 3 variables to the stored procedure. Well, that's not even true. Minimum 3. The type of operation I want, which entity to operate on, and trigger the toggle code, the onChange action on the toggle to run. And finally, we go back to our app code screen. And we're looking at orders. Truly painful. I want to apologize again. I apologize enough, but this is very painful. And so there's the toggle button that handles orders. Select it, the onChange event. And I'll walk through this, but I won't expect you to remember any of it because it's an entirely different world. The first thing we do is we create a local variable. You can think of local variables and global variables in the same way you would think of as private and public variables in VBA. This local variable only has a value inside this one screen. Once I leave this screen, it's gone. What I do with it is I invoke my stored procedure. PowerApps is aware that there's a stored procedure called CRUD order. And you notice that it does the same thing that Access does with the schema. I tell it what CRUD type to use. And again, I default for safety reasons to R. I pass it the current order ID. And if this is an existing order, this will be a non-zero value. If it's a new order, this will be 0. But I use coalesce to force out any possible null that would screw up the works. For the order, I need the employee ID. And again, I'm trying to minimize non-core errors by ensuring that I never pass nulls. The customer, the order date, the tax rate, the tax status. These are all parameters that stored procedure expects. Notice that I do not need to pass in my output parameters. I get those a different way. When this stored procedure runs, it sends back a result, and that result will be stored in this variable. I don't think there's anything in it right now. It's blank. It should be blank. It'll come back as a record. Now, but because I can get back a record set on a select, it will come back as a table as well. So now it sends me back a result set, which contains the record. It sends back three things. Sends back the result set, which is the record, sends me back the return code, which I mentioned prominently before, and it sends me back the output parameters. And the output parameters will consist of the primary key value of the table that I impacted, or a 0 if it's an error. It will include the error message and the error code, and that's what's in this output parameters record. And then I can parse the elements of the output parameters to give messages back. There's one of these for each of the entities. This stored procedure knows what's in SQL Server, but PowerApps knows only what is exposed here on this screen. It's completely isolated from anything in SQL Server. So I think that is way more than enough to put you through as far as demos. Do you have any questions before I close this?
Yes, I have a
Hey,
question.
George.
Yes, go ahead, Tom, first.
Back to the code for a moment. You're setting up that local variable, and then I didn't see it, but I'm assuming you then invoke that stored procedure.
Yes.
Could
Okay.
you
Yes.
conceivably have created an if construct with 4 elements for, if the global variable for CRUD is 1, is 2, is 3, is 4, invoke the child stored procedure?
Wow, that's one of those big design questions that I fretted about. Yes, I could very much do that branching logic right here and call the four child store procedures from here rather than through the master. And that's an entirely valid option. I don't have, a good hook to hang my hat on to say which is the right one. What would you do?
Well, it seems like it's a clunky editor. And you would have to copy paste a lot of the code.
Yes.
So, going to a single sprock is not a crazy idea.
Yeah. I mean, that was my original thought. I mean, the minimum of I got really tired of copy paste, modify two things, copy paste, modify two things.
Yes.
And this was the first idea that I lit on to avoid that. What I'm hoping is that I'll be able to figure out a way. I got started on that. I didn't get enough success to say this will work, that I can do dynamic parameterized queries, at least for the selects, because I don't have to worry about update. But that also gives me the ability to select on the basis of either one specific record or all records in the table. So then I can use that same sort of procedure, the output result set, as the record set for a screen, or the row source for a combo box. And instead of binding the combo box to the underlying table, bind it to the stored procedure. And I call that stored procedure using that send me back all version. These are all things that I'm thinking about. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Can I offer my thoughts on how I would build those stored procedures?
Yes.
And giving the application I would use to do it is a bit dumb, but the methodology I would use is that I would use VBA to build the stored procedures. So in an Access application, I'm linked to that table, and I can link I can iterate through the fields in that table and build the SQL statements.
That's a great idea, Ken, because that's been kind of the big bugaboo here is how do I know what fields to ask for?
Yeah, so in Access can look and see whether it's allows nulls, and it can see the data type and what have you. So you just point an Access database at the table, and it can build the SPs for you.
Then I just have to put them back.
Well, yeah, it just pumps it out to a text file. That's how I build a lot of stuff.
Yeah, me too. And my version is based on templates. So you have a template of SQL code. Because, for example, your try block, the way you return your error information if there is a catch. All of that is kind of boilerplate, and only the guts of the CRUD operation is the variable part that, as Ken said, you can write VBA, or in my case it was C# to
be honest, that hadn't even
hit
occurred to me.
SQL Server and do all that work.
Yeah, I mean, this is no less labor intensive than doing it in PowerApps. It's just a lot more productive because I can fire it off and see what happens. I can fire it off and see what happens.
Potentially, this kind of code that we're looking at now could, of course, also be created by VBA by saying, okay, we are dealing here with a order record, and therefore these are the fields, and therefore this is the code.
Yeah. Yeah. So you could point that against anybody's database.
Yeah. And if you make a table design change, you can just regenerate your CRUD operations, replace your stored procedures.
Yeah, so some time ago, a couple of months, 3 or 4 months ago, Adolf had a presentation on building data classes, which more or less wrote the code for looking at a table and wrote the code for the data class. So you could just take his code, modify it to build your stored procedures.
Yeah.
But personally, I actually have a table of the tables and a table of the fields in my front end, and that's what I use to do it. But you could just as easily just look at the table def and the fields in it and do it that way.
I like those ideas. That's even more than I was hoping for, frankly. I was just mostly looking for like a reality check. Am I being incredibly naive to think that this is a reasonable thing to do? Because my ultimate goal, I guess, would be to say, can we put together a team of people? And I'll go to my summary slide, and you've already expanded on that point in a couple of ways. And ultimately, I can fantasize about a database, a design pattern, which the PowerApps interface has no link tables or table connections. All data operations are handled with this method.
So the question is, can you use VBA to create code that you can then paste into PowerApps?
No. But my ultimate goal would be the code in the PowerApps interface is so stripped down that it's no longer a pain to work with. All the data validation can be done the same way, I think. All the data operations, all the CRUD operations, I can't think of anything else. Well, I guess I can, but most of the things I can think of can be handled that way. And you just leave basic manipulating of the controls in the interface in the PowerApps interface. Disable or enable controls depending on the state.
But I guess in PowerApps, you've actually got to add the control, so it's not that much more to add the code.
Yes, good point. That was my point originally about the difference between a bound form and an unbound form and an unbound screen. PowerApps is essentially an unbound environment. So you're doing everything anyway. You might as well do it in an environment which is more comfortable.
Yeah. Maybe, I don't know if this is too much detail, but if you were to reuse that set of stored procedures that we're now co-generating, right? From a .NET application.
Yes. Yes.
In most patterns, there is a way to how .NET would like you to do it is to return the record that was acted upon. So if you're doing an add, the entire record is echoed back, not just a status of success or a PK value.
That's the last point on my slide.
Updates and deletes. Even with the delete, the record is echoed back and say this is the one that was deleted.
Yep.
Was the table variable?
Well, I'm not going to try to show you because of the performance speed, but it comes back as a table variable. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Well, it can come back. It comes back as either a single record. It differentiates between a single record and a table, but for all intents and purposes, it's a one record table. And as you see my final note on my slide, Tom.
Yes.
That was so this is, and we've gone well past this. How different are the skill sets required? Can one person do all of this? Go, Dominique. Go, Domenico. You have a.
Yeah, thank you, George. You saw it. You're touching in an area here where I have to do some client work already for Veterans Affairs, and we use PowerApps, we use Power BI, we use SQL Server and SharePoint. And the reason why we have to touch SharePoint is that Veterans Affairs, as the platform, as the client organization, they don't have a connection between SQL Server and PowerApps. I guess that's a premium connection. So my first question to you is, what you're showing here today, a premium connection that allows for PowerApps and SQL Server to talk to each other, or does this get around that because stored procedures are not a data connection?
Oh, you have broached the licensing question. I was hoping to avoid the licensing question. This is a premium service. It costs, depending on how you structure the license, it costs $20 a seat a month. However, the version that I have, I can create multiple PowerApps under that same license. So right now, I think I have, I don't know, 5 or 6 that I created, all under that same license. But every user pays $20 a month to use a premium license, which is SQL Server. So if you have a situation where your budget says that's not a feasible solution, then you're looking at SharePoint. And
yeah, that was our situation here. They had literally, even with the discount, it was like $4 a seat or something like that. They wouldn't even pony up a little bit of dollars for it. So as a result, our forms and everything has to get stored to SharePoint. And then on an hourly basis, we have a job that goes and checks between SharePoint and SQL to update SQL and get it back, in there that way. It's a tedious process, but it's the license-free option that we had. And I was hoping you were going to tell me that I could kick off some stored procedures from here and pass some data, but unfortunately, that's not the case.
Oh, I deliberately avoided addressing that question precisely for that reason. It's a showstopper for a lot of organizations. However, there's
still
nothing
great nonetheless.
There's nothing. Well, yes, there is. Yeah, you could. If you do you use Power Automate for that data transfer, or do you? How are you doing it?
We do. I think there is some Power Automate that's going on there, but it's using a very craftily structured SQL statement. It's almost like a SQL injection to more or less go and actually, even though it's quote unquote reading from a table in SQL, it's reading from SharePoint and inserting into SQL. So it's a really craftily way of doing things. It's almost like I said, it's almost like if you were doing some SQL injection hacking route.
It sounds to me like Power Automate. To me,
Yeah,
that's
I think you're right. It's on an hourly cron job, not a cron, but it's on an hourly based basis to run a script that does that. That's correct.
Yeah. Yeah, the very first day I looked at this, I thought about SharePoint with Power Automate, and I quickly realized Power Automate didn't have the horsepower to do what I wanted to do. But because I already have this license that allows me to spin up a new SQL Server database and create a new PowerApps against it, it doesn't cost me anything incremental to do it, because I'm already eating that basic $20 a month for half a dozen other PowerApps that I play with sometimes. Actually, I use one every day. I have an exercise and diet app that runs on my phone, and I can track, walking miles and so on directly through my phone. But because I already have that, then this license didn't add on to that cost. I think if anybody, I'm gonna kind of pontificate a little bit, but I'm gonna say anybody who is comfortable working with either all of these technologies, and I'm looking at the screen here and seeing most of you probably are comfortable with .NET, VBA, and SQL Server in some degree or another, this would not be a great stretch, because if you do all the heavy code in SQL Server, and Kent's given us a great idea for how to structure it. Tom does the same thing. So I'm thinking, okay, there's a track there to run on. That's not an unviable option. Then I think an Access developer could extend their toolkit. But I will step back and let you guys talk about it.
Oh,
can
question,
I-
George, on premium applications, is PowerApps premium?
PowerApps by itself is a basic license, which is $5, I think. Well, they have different flavors of that, but it's basically $5 a month minimum. It can go up from that, but think of it as $5 a month.
Yeah, there's no free version, right?
No.
And one thing I'm looking at here, and maybe you guys probably have a lot of experience with this too, is, I noticed that everything here is sort of, you're building it with these stored procedures. How's the debugging here, really? I mean, because that for me it can be one of the most difficult problems, especially when you have an app that's calling, stored procedures, like on a different database, on a different server, something you might not have access to. The debugging can be pretty insane, actually.
Sorry, I forgot I muted myself. That's the heart of the question I asked about what the skill set is, because in order to do this successfully, I think you would have to have solid knowledge of debugging stored procedures. And that's where I'm facing an uphill slog.
Absolutely. And in that, you can't really just step through them. I end up using like error messages a lot, type of thing. So it can be really difficult. That's one of the things that's great about VBA is you can just kind of, load it up in the debugger. Same with like C# or, .NET, VB.NET or whatever. You can just load it up in the debugger and step through each little thing. And especially when you use obviously you can't always do this, but if you're using your own SQL statements in the code, it can be a lot easier to debug than when you're calling it across to a SQL server that's, some remote stored procedure.
Yeah, I will comment on that. In PowerApps, code either runs or it doesn't run. There's no hidden bugs. If there is a minor syntax error, your code will not run, at least in that section. It puts a little red squiggly line, error, and it gives you a very generic error message, and nothing happens until you fix that. So that's in your face debugging.
Huh, interesting.
I would also say, Jeffrey, if our CRUD stored procedures are code-generated, they don't have errors. The errors would only come in if you had stored procedures with additional business logic that could potentially get complex and would require
Sure.
debugging using print statements similar to debug.print in VBA.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's a myriad of different things that could be happening, of course. And also in cases, you may not just even have the ability to get to people's, it might be somebody else wrote that stored procedure. You're just calling it from somewhere. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things here, but with these Power Apps, I don't really see a way of debugging this directly.
Well, and again, that's the heart of one of my questions. Does this require a single developer who knows his or her way around all of the components? Or does it require a team where you have someone who knows how to create stored procedures, someone who knows how to run the VBA, and someone who knows how to do the Power Apps, collaborating? Because remember, the ultimate goal in my mind, the ultimate goal would be that the same set of stored procedures are exposed to multiple interfaces. With all it is a parameter in and a result out. And as long as you hook that up correctly, it doesn't matter which interface you're working. Am I way off base there?
No, I think that's reasonable. I don't know. It's a good question. I don't have enough experience with these things to really say for sure whether or not. I'm just going based on what I saw this evening.
Yeah,
that would be my extent really of what I know about Power Apps and what you've shown.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I would say if you think of a design pattern like MVC, model view container, then controller, sorry. The whole point of such patterns is to have such high level of separation that you can rip out one of the whole view layer and say, well, that was nice, that was a web app, and replace it with, let's say, a Windows app, a desktop app, and the other layers remain the same.
Yeah, and the idea of putting most of the business logic and most of the data validation logic into the database means that that's even easier to do.
And if you're using Power App, you don't have the luxury of doing a 3-layer or 4-layer construct. So putting the business layer in the back end, I don't have a problem with it. It solves the problem.
Yeah, I think so.
But is a novice user going to be able to do that?
Well, that's an excellent question, and I keep coming. I don't think so. I mean, I think you
Power
need
Apps,
to be
something for developers, not for your information worker.
Yeah, think of it in the same way that Microsoft, and I probably should turn off the recording. Microsoft has often been accused of thinking about Access as sort of an entry-level, tool, and not really recognizing the power that a professionally designed Access database can have. So if you look at that end of the scale, the power user end, I think it is viable because that power user is going to create 3, 4, 5, 6 screens, connect to 3, 4, 5, 6 data sources. And if they're all stored procedures, he or she does not even have to know what those things do as long as they give him back the right result when he sends a request. He's good to go. To take it to another level, obviously you need a professional database or developer of sorts, but yeah. But unfortunately, I think that's the way Microsoft sees both Power Apps and Access is on that lower end of the scale.
Yeah, I definitely think they're two different beasts for sure. The thing you're right with the thing with Access is there's really two types of users. You have the developer user and you have the end user. Sometimes the end user is doing simple tasks and working with things kind of simply, making little simple a table of some stuff, and but usually the developer is making an app that the end user would use. And so maybe that's the model for these Power Apps. It just seems like there's a really big learning curve there with all this SQL stuff that you have to know up front to be able to make this Power App.
Well, again, I'll come back to saying, you know, if you use SharePoint lists and a simple 4-screen app, there isn't that much to it.
Yeah. Okay.
And
Yeah.
and I think, but Access. Well, I'm getting on my soapbox, but I think Access has been subject to that viewpoint for a long time. That it's for the novice, for the for the business user. It's not.
But
It's
how
not-
much of that is Access itself, and how much of it is the view that C developers have on VBA?
Well, yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
To me, it's like Access. Somebody who's with a very limited knowledge of databases can make a table really quick. They can even kind of learn how to use the query interface and stuff like that to grab data. But like for this, to write full on stored procedures and stuff, you have to know, I mean, quite a bit about SQL Server. You know what I mean? It's not just like generating one little simple table and kind of drag and dropping some fields onto a design service to get your query. And I know that's really tough for a lot of entry level users just to get that level of things working.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I agree absolutely, and I'm definitely not aiming my thinking towards
the end user, I get it.
that way. I'm saying that if you're a developer and either you're by yourself or part of a team, where you have access to those skills, no pun intended, where you have .NET skills, SQL Server skills, whatever else you need to put the whole package together, then it makes sense to consider whether you can augment that in a way. But I definitely wouldn't have tried this 3 years ago. And I only tried it now because I had a month of more or less freedom in my schedule to work it out. And I'm on my 3rd iteration. As Tom pointed out, I first had all the stored procedures in one of those toggle buttons, and I got tired of twiddly little errors and copy and paste and stuff. And I thought there's got to be a better way, and that sent me down the path of exploring, well, what else can be done. But I definitely don't think this is something that you would offer to a new person. No.
George, thank you very much for your interesting and informative presentation. Oh,
Well, thank
and
you.
thanks
Absolutely.
also for your step through of a complex stored procedure and your funny way to say things like beta alpha. And I don't know if I can make it work this version. And well, it looked right when I wrote it. And is this a solution looking for a problem?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, very good.
Very
There's a lot there.
Okay, well, I'm going to turn off the recording so we can.
Oh, for the second time?
No, that was the first time.